The Ainu people, often seen as the indigenous group of the northern islands of Japan, have a history that stretches back to a time long before the recorded history of Japan itself. While their origins remain shrouded in mystery, their story is one that intertwines with the very land they inhabited, a history marked by resilience, adaptation, and the struggle to preserve their unique identity in the face of constant external pressures. The Ainu are often described as an ancient people, distinct from the ethnic majority of Japan. The Yamato, in language, culture, religion, and physical characteristics, their presence on the islands of Hokkaido, the Kuril Islands, and parts of Sakhalin has been acknowledged by scholars, though the Ainu themselves are often treated as a people whose history has been largely erased or marginalized by the dominant powers in Japanese society. The first known references to the Ainu people appear in Japanese records from the early centuries of the Common Era, though it is believed that they had inhabited the northernmost islands of Japan long before these written accounts were made. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Ainu could trace their ancestry back thousands of years to the Jomon period, approximately 14,000 to 300 BCE, a time when the people of Japan lived in small, tribal groups, engaged in hunting, fishing, and gathering. The Ainu share many cultural and linguistic characteristics with the Jomon people, whose pottery and tools have been found across Japan, providing evidence of their presence on the islands long before the spread of rice farming and the advent of the Yayoi period, 300 BCE, 300 CE. However, the exact relationship between the Jomon people and the Ainu remains unclear. Some scholars argue that the Ainu are descendants of the Jomon, while others suggest that they might be part of a larger migratory group that arrived in Japan from the mainland of Asia. Genetic studies have pointed to the Ainu as possessing a distinctive genetic lineage, one that sets them apart from the larger East Asian population. The genetic markers present in the Ainu population have also suggested connections to ancient populations of Siberia and the Russian Far East, pointing to the possibility of a long history of migration and interaction between peoples across the Bering Strait and into the northern Pacific regions. By the time of the earliest written records, the Ainu were firmly established in the northern regions of Japan. They lived primarily in the lands of Hokkaido, Sakhalin, and the Kuril Islands, though their territory also extended to parts of the Russian Far East. Unlike the Yamato people, who gradually spread southward from the central islands of Japan, the Ainu retained a more isolated existence in the north, maintaining their unique cultural practices. Their lifestyle was deeply connected to the natural world, especially the forests, rivers, and seas. They were skilled hunters and fishermen, living in close relationship with the land and the animals they depended upon. This connection to nature, and particularly to the animals they hunted, became a central feature of their spirituality, which held that all creatures, from the smallest insect to the largest bear, had their own spirits, or kamui. These spirits were believed to influence the lives of humans, and rituals and ceremonies were performed to honor them. The Ainu were primarily animists, and their spiritual beliefs revolved around the worship of kamui, or deities, that were associated with animals, plants, natural phenomena, and ancestors. Among the most revered were the bear spirits, kumakamui, which were honored in elaborate ceremonies that involved the sacrifice of bears. The Ainu believed that by performing rituals properly, they could ensure that the spirits of the animals they hunted would return and offer themselves again in the future, maintaining the balance of nature and ensuring the survival of the people. These ceremonies, such as the Ayamant, or bear sacrifice ritual, were vital to the Ainu way of life and were carried out with great reverence and respect. Despite their rich spiritual and cultural traditions, the Ainu were not the only group inhabiting the northern lands of Japan. As early as the 8th century, records from the Nara period, 710 to 794, mention encounters between the Ainu and the Japanese imperial court. The Yamato people, who had established the first centralized government on the Japanese archipelago, began to extend their influence over the northern regions. encountering the Ainu and their way of life as they moved northward. The encounters between the Ainu and the early Japanese settlers were often marked by conflict. The Ainu, who were organized in decentralized, tribal communities, often found themselves in conflict with the encroaching agricultural settlers from the south, who sought to establish control over the fertile lands of Hokkaido. One of the earliest records of such encounters is found in the Nihon Shoki, the historical chronicle of Japan, which was written in the 8th century. In this text, the Ainu are referred to as the Emishur, a term that was used to describe the indigenous people of the north. The Emishur were depicted as barbarian or wild tribes, a characterization that would persist for many centuries. The Japanese government, which was consolidating power under the imperial court, saw the Ainu as a threat to their expansion into the northern regions. As a result, they began military campaigns to subjugate the Ainu, leading to a long history of conflict and displacement. The Ainu were eventually pushed out of the more fertile areas of Hokkaido, driven into the forests and mountains, where they continued to live in isolation. Despite the pressure from the imperial court, the Ainu remained resilient. They continued to practice their traditional way of life, including hunting, fishing, and gathering, and their spiritual beliefs remained intact. Over time, however, the Ainu people began to feel the effects of external pressures. The introduction of new technologies, particularly rice farming and metalworking, began to reshape the landscape and economy of the north. The Ainu found themselves increasingly marginalized, their land taken over by settlers from the south. The Japanese state began to institute policies that undermined Ainu autonomy, including efforts to suppress their language, culture, and religion. The advent of the Meiji Restoration in the late 19th century brought with it a new wave of efforts to assimilate the Ainu into the broader Japanese society. The government passed laws that encouraged the assimilation of the Ainu, forcing them to adopt Japanese customs, language, and clothing. The Ainu were encouraged to abandon their traditional way of life, and many were pushed into poverty as their land was further encroached upon by settlers. In the years that followed, the Ainu were increasingly forced to live as second-class citizens, their cultural practices relegated to the margins of Japanese society. It was not until the late 20th century that the Ainu began to regain recognition as an indigenous people with a unique cultural heritage. In 2008, the Japanese government officially recognized the Ainu as an indigenous people of Japan, a significant step in acknowledging their cultural and historical significance. Since then, there has been a renewed interest in preserving Ainu culture, language, and traditions, though much work remains to be done to ensure that the Ainu people are able to fully reclaim their identity and heritage in modern Japan. The Ainu people are often considered one of the most distinct ethnic groups in East Asia, not only due to their physical appearance but also because of their unique cultural practices, language, and belief systems. These traits set them apart from the dominant Yamato Japanese population and highlight their ancient connection to the northern landscapes they once occupied. For centuries, the Ainu people have cultivated a way of life that revolves around their close relationship with the natural world, a deep spirituality intertwined with the land, the animals, and the elements. In this section, we will explore the elements of Ainu culture that continue to define them, such as their language, art, religion, and societal values, which have shaped the very essence of their identity. The Ainu language, perhaps one of the most striking features of Ainu culture, is an isolate, meaning it is not related to any other known language family. Linguistically, it differs drastically from the Japanese language and is considered by many to be one of the most important markers of Ainu identity. Ainu language is traditionally an oral language, passed down through generations by word of mouth, rich in metaphors, chants, and stories that reflect the people's connection to nature and their cosmology. The Ainu language, however, has been severely endangered over the years, particularly after the Meiji period, when Japanese language policies suppressed the use of indigenous languages. By the 20th century, Only a few elderly Ainu speakers remained, and the language had begun to disappear from daily life. Efforts to revive the Ainu language in recent decades have become central to the preservation of Ainu culture. While the language is still far from being fully restored, a new generation of Ainu activists and educators have started teaching the language to young Ainu children. In addition, there have been movements to incorporate the Ainu language into schools, universities, and cultural centers, offering hope that the language can be revived in some form. Despite the challenges, the language remains a vital part of Ainu cultural pride, serving as both a tool for cultural preservation and a symbol of resistance against cultural assimilation. The Ainu writing system was a recent development in Ainu history. Historically, the Ainu did not have a written form of their language. However, in the 19th century, efforts were made to transcribe Ainu using the katakana script, which was primarily used for writing foreign words in Japanese. This was an attempt to preserve the language and make it more accessible, although the system was not standardized and remained limited in scope. Today, efforts continue to create a more comprehensive writing system, which includes the use of both katakana and a new form of syllabic characters designed specifically for the Ainu language. In terms of Ainu art, the most recognizable forms are those associated with textiles, wood carving, and embroidery. The Ainu have a long tradition of producing intricate handicrafts that serve both practical and spiritual purposes. One of the most iconic Ainu art forms is Ainu embroidery, known for its detailed patterns and symbolic motifs. Women in Ainu communities were often responsible for making these textiles, which were not only used in everyday life but also as ceremonial clothing. These garments were typically decorated with beautiful, geometric patterns that had spiritual significance. The patterns often represented the natural world, including images of trees, animals, and the sea, reflecting the Ainu's deep connection to their environment. Another significant form of Ainu art is wood carving, which is particularly seen in the creation of ritual objects. Ainu carvers were skilled in producing masks, figures, and utensils that were used in religious ceremonies. These objects were often crafted from wood, with deep symbolic meaning attached to them. For example, wooden figures called katakana were carved to represent spirits and deities that were honored in religious rituals. These figures would be placed in the homes of Ainu families or in sacred spaces to invite the protection of the spirits. The craftsmanship of these objects was so important that it was passed down from one generation to the next, with certain families gaining recognition for their exceptional skills. In addition to textiles and carving, the Ainu also created ritual objects, such as drums and flutes, which were used in their spiritual ceremonies. The Ainu believed that music had the power to communicate with the spirits of nature. Instruments like the tankori, a traditional stringed instrument, were used in both sacred and secular settings. The tankori, a stringed instrument with 4 or 5 strings, was used to produce melodies that were thought to connect the human world to the spiritual one. The melodies themselves were considered prayers, and it was believed that by playing these instruments, the player could send their wishes, hopes, and prayers to the kamui, gods or spirits. The tone of the music was delicate and haunting, adding an air of reverence and deep connection to nature. The Ainu are also renowned for their ceremonial practices and rituals that revolve around the worship of nature. Central to Ainu spirituality is the belief in kamui, or the spirits of animals, plants, and natural forces. The Ainu hold that every living being has a spirit, which can influence the course of human lives. Among the most important spirits are those of the bear, salmon, and deer, which were considered sacred animals. These animals were seen not only as important sources of food, but also as carriers of spiritual significance. Rituals such as the Ayamant, or the bear sacrifice ritual, are perhaps the most famous of the Ainu spiritual practices. During this ceremony, a bear, which had been raised in a special ritualistic manner, was killed and its spirit sent back to the gods through an elaborate ceremony. The Ainu believed that by offering the bear's spirit to the gods, they would ensure a good hunting season and a bountiful harvest. The Ayamant ritual was a deeply symbolic act, representing the Ainu's belief in the interconnectedness of all life and the importance of honoring the spirits of the animals that sustain them. These ceremonies were often performed during the winter months, when the Ainu would retreat to their villages to prepare for the coming of spring. The bear sacrifice was a sacred event, carried out with great reverence, and it played a central role in Ainu spiritual life. During the ritual, Ainu men would sing chants and perform dances to invoke the spirits of the gods, ensuring that the bear's spirit would ascend to the heavens. However, the Ayamant and other Ainu ceremonies were not solely focused on the animal spirits. The Ainu also venerated other natural forces, including the sun, moon, and wind, as well as ancestors who were believed to have become deities after death. These beliefs permeated every aspect of Ainu daily life, from their hunting practices to their social structures. Every action, no matter how mundane, was imbued with a sense of the sacred, as the Ainu saw their entire existence as being governed by the spirits of nature. The role of shamanism within Ainu society cannot be overlooked. Shamans, or Itako, were believed to have the ability to communicate directly with the spirits and act as intermediaries between the human world and the divine. These women, sometimes men, though women were more common, were highly respected within their communities and often called upon to conduct ceremonies, offer guidance, and heal the sick. The Itako's ability to enter a trance state and speak in the voices of the gods was considered a divine gift, and her role was essential to maintaining the spiritual health of the community. Shamans were also responsible for interpreting the messages of the gods and performing rites of passage for individuals, ensuring that the cycles of life were properly observed. The Ainu religion can thus be described as a complex system of animism and shamanism, one that is intrinsically tied to the natural world. The Ainu saw themselves as part of a larger, interconnected web of life, in which humans, animals, and the elements coexisted in harmony. This worldview was one of mutual respect and balance, and the rituals that the Ainu performed were designed to maintain that harmony, ensuring the continued well-being of their community and the natural world around them. In conclusion, the cultural practices of the Ainu people are a testament to their deep connection to the natural world, their spiritual beliefs, and their artistic creativity. From their language, art, and rituals to their music and craftsmanship, the Ainu have created a rich and diverse cultural heritage that continues to inspire admiration and awe, despite the centuries of external pressures, including cultural assimilation and marginalization. The Ainu remain one of the most fascinating indigenous peoples in the world, and their efforts to preserve their culture and traditions are a reminder of the importance of cultural diversity and heritage in our modern world. The social structure of the Ainu was relatively simple compared to more complex hierarchical societies, yet it was deeply rooted in their spiritual beliefs and their relationship to nature. Ainu society was organized around extended families and clans, each of which had a close-knit bond and shared responsibility for the well-being of the group. Each clan was led by an elder or chief, often referred to as the Kotankor, who was responsible for making important decisions, overseeing the distribution of resources, and leading ceremonial practices. The Kotankor was chosen based on experience, wisdom, and spiritual insight rather than on inherited status, reflecting the Ainu's belief that leadership should be grounded in merit rather than bloodlines. This practice of leadership by elder wisdom reflects the Ainu's emphasis on collective decision-making and respect for the natural world and ancestral spirits. The Ainu lived in small, self-sufficient villages, known as Kotan, which were typically located in remote areas close to rivers, forests, or mountains, in places where they could hunt, fish, and gather resources. These villages were often isolated from other groups, as the Ainu preferred to live independently and maintain their cultural integrity. The Kotan was more than just a place of residence. It was a spiritual and social hub where the daily activities and rituals of the people were carried out. Families in each Kotan would typically live in chais, traditional Ainu houses made of wood and thatched with grasses, designed to withstand the cold northern climate. The chais was a communal space where families gathered to eat, sleep, and engage in social activities. The structure of the chais reflected the values of the Ainu, emphasizing communal living and the importance of sharing both labor and resources. In Ainu society, gender roles were distinct but complementary. Women were primarily responsible for domestic tasks such as cooking, cleaning, and crafting. One of the most important roles of Ainu women was the creation of clothing, including the atus, a traditional woven garment made from fibers of the indigenous onin, Japanese false nettle. The process of making atus was highly labor-intensive and took several months, but it was essential to Ainu cultural identity. The intricacy and beauty of the atus was a reflection of the wearer's social standing, and it was often worn during ceremonial events. Women also played a crucial role in spiritual rituals, particularly those associated with the kamui, as their connection to the natural world was seen as the source of their spiritual strength. Men, on the other hand, were primarily responsible for hunting, fishing, and providing for the family. The Ainu people were hunter-gatherers, relying on a combination of hunting, fishing, and foraging for survival. They hunted bears, deer, wild boar, and small game, and fished for salmon, trout, and other river fish. The hunting practices of the Ainu were deeply intertwined with their spirituality, as hunting was not just a means of sustenance but a sacred act. Rituals were performed before, during, and after hunts to ensure the animal spirits would be honored and that the hunters would be successful. The Ainu believed that if the hunt was conducted improperly or disrespectfully, the spirit of the animal would become angry, resulting in failure in future hunts. This strong sense of respect for nature and its creatures was a key component of the Ainu's worldview. The Ainu economy was built on a combination of hunting, fishing, and agriculture, although the latter was not as highly developed as among the Japanese settlers to the south. The Ainu did engage in limited forms of farming, growing barley, buckwheat, and some vegetables. However, their primary means of sustenance were derived from hunting and fishing. The Ainu's traditional fishing techniques, particularly the use of traps and spears for catching salmon, were highly developed and demonstrated their intimate knowledge of the rivers and streams where the fish lived. They also made use of bears for food, clothing, and ritual purposes. The Ainu believed that by honoring the spirits of the animals, they would ensure that the animals would return to provide for them in the future, maintaining a sustainable balance between human needs and nature. While the Ainu were relatively self-sufficient, they also engaged in trade with neighboring peoples. The Ainu trade networks were extensive, spanning the northern islands of Japan, the Kuril Islands, and parts of Sakhalin. They traded items such as fish, pelts, wooden crafts, ceremonial objects, and amber with other indigenous groups and settlers. This exchange of goods was not simply a matter of economic trade, but also a way to build relationships with neighboring peoples and to honor the interconnectedness of the natural world. Trade was considered a form of social interaction, and the goods exchanged were often seen as symbolic of the relationships between different communities. The Ainu religion was centered around a deep belief in the presence of spirits in all aspects of the natural world. The Ainu referred to these spirits as kamui. The kamui were believed to inhabit everything around the Ainu: animals, plants, natural forces, and even man-made objects. Each spirit had its own role to play in the world, and the Ainu maintained rituals to honor these spirits in order to maintain harmony and balance in their lives. While some spirits were considered more powerful than others, the Ainu did not elevate any single spirit above all others. Rather, they believed that all spirits were interconnected, and that it was the responsibility of humans to maintain a respectful relationship with them. As such, the Ainu never considered themselves the masters of nature, but rather its caretakers. Rituals and ceremonies were an integral part of Ainu spiritual life. Shamans, Itako, both male and female, played a significant role in the community by acting as intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds. These shamans would conduct ceremonies to invoke the Kamui, to ask for blessings, or to appease the spirits when necessary. The Atako would enter into a trance, often induced by music or chanting, and communicate with the spirits on behalf of the people. The Ainu believed that through these rituals, they could influence the world around them and ensure that they lived in harmony with nature. One of the most important rituals in Ainu culture was the Iamant or bear sacrifice ritual. Bears were considered the most sacred animals among the Ainu, and the Iamant was a way to honor the spirit of the bear and send it back to the gods. The bear sacrifice was conducted with great care and reverence. A young bear would be raised in captivity, treated with respect, and cared for by the family that had taken responsibility for it. After a certain period, the bear would be killed in a ritualized manner, and its spirit would be sent back to the heavens through the ceremonial prayers and dances of the Ainu people. This ritual served not only as a means of honoring the bear spirit, but also as a symbol of the Ainu's reliance on nature and their respect for the life of the animals that provided for them. In addition to the Iamant, the Ainu also practiced other rituals throughout the year to mark the changing seasons, the hunt, and other important events in their lives. These ceremonies often involved elaborate dancing, chanting, and music, all designed to invite the blessings of the spirits and to ensure the continued prosperity of the community. The Kamuarami was a ceremony held to honor the spirits of the wild, asking for protection and prosperity in the coming year. Similarly, Koten Rami, the harvest festival, celebrated the successful gathering of resources and acknowledged the blessings of the spirits that made it possible. While the Ainu had a strong cultural and spiritual life, their social interactions with other ethnic groups, particularly the Japanese, were not always peaceful. Early historical records show that the Ainu frequently came into conflict with the settlers from the Japanese mainland, particularly as the Yamato state extended its influence over the northern islands. The Ainu were often regarded by the Japanese as barbarians or savages, a term that further marginalized them and justified their subjugation. Over time, the Japanese government began to implement policies to assimilate the Ainu, which included attempts to eradicate their language, suppress their religion, and encourage them to adopt Japanese customs. Despite these pressures, the Ainu resisted assimilation, maintaining their cultural identity and way of life, though they were forced into increasingly marginal lands as the Japanese expanded their territories. Today, while the Ainu have been recognized as an indigenous group by the Japanese government, they continue to face challenges related to cultural preservation and political representation. Despite these challenges, the Ainu continue to fight for their rights, reclaim their cultural heritage, and ensure that their voices are heard in the modern world. The history of the Ainu people is marked by centuries of cultural resilience, as well as periods of conflict and assimilation. Originally inhabiting the northern regions of Japan's Hokkaido Island, the Kuril Islands, and parts of Sakhalin, the Ainu's geographical location positioned them at a crossroads of diverse cultures, including the powerful Yamato Japanese to the south and other indigenous peoples to the north. This made the Ainu's history one of constant negotiation and adaptation, often involving tension between their own traditional ways of life and the external forces of other expanding empires and cultures. The origins of the Ainu are somewhat shrouded in mystery, but linguistic and archaeological evidence suggests that they are the descendants of the Jaman people, an ancient group who lived in the Japanese archipelago thousands of years ago. The Jaman people are believed to have been among the first inhabitants of Japan, and their hunter-gatherer society laid the foundations for many of the traditions and cultural practices that the Ainu would later adopt. Over time, the Ainu began to develop their own distinct cultural and linguistic identity, diverging from the other peoples of Japan as well as the various indigenous groups of Siberia and the far north. Historically, the Ainu did not have a centralized government or political structure. Instead, they were organized into small, independent clans, each led by a Koten Corps or chief. These clans, which were deeply connected to specific geographic areas, would often come into conflict with one another over territory, resources, or political power. These early conflicts, however, were not always violent and sometimes involved negotiations or alliances through marriage or trade. The Yamato Japanese, who first began to establish their presence in the Japanese archipelago around the 4th century AD, initially viewed the Ainu with curiosity, and sometimes with admiration for their skills in hunting and fishing. However, as the Japanese Empire began to expand, the Ainu's way of life came under increasing threat. The Yamato forces sought to assert their dominance over the Ainu lands, pushing them out of fertile regions and forcing them into the harsher northern environments of Hokkaido. By the 14th century, Japan had established greater control over the northern islands, and the Ainu began to experience greater pressure from the increasingly centralized shogunates and feudal states. These pressures escalated under the Tokugawa shogunate, 1603 to 1868, which implemented strict policies to centralize power and suppress any local dissent. As the Japanese Empire expanded its influence, the Ainu were forced to cede more land to the Japanese colonists and merchants who sought to exploit the region's resources, particularly in terms of timber, fisheries, and animal pelts. In response, the Ainu began to organize more formally to resist these external encroachments. The Ainu uprisings of the 17th and 18th centuries, most notably the Koshimane Rebellion in 1457, were attempts to preserve their independence and protect their cultural and territorial rights. While these uprisings were ultimately unsuccessful, they marked a significant chapter in the Ainu's fight to maintain their autonomy. The Ainu's resistance was fueled not only by the physical threat of land loss, but also by a deep spiritual commitment to their ancestral lands and the sacred bond they believed they shared with the natural world. Despite their efforts to resist, the Ainu were gradually displaced by Japanese settlers, who sought to assimilate them through various means, including introducing agriculture and Japanese education. With the rise of modernization during the Meiji Restoration, 1868 to 1912, the Japanese government implemented policies that further marginalized the Ainu. The government began to impose Japanese customs, suppress Ainu language and religious practices, and assimilate Ainu children into Japanese society through compulsory schooling. The Ainu were categorized as former barbarians, and their distinct cultural identity was actively discouraged. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the Japanese government had successfully integrated most of Hokkaido into the empire, and the Ainu were no longer able to maintain their independence. They were relegated to small communities in rural, isolated regions, where they were forced to adopt Japanese ways of life, including the Japanese language, religion, and cultural norms. The traditional Ainu clothing, such as the atus, was replaced with Japanese-style clothing, and Ainu children were punished for speaking their native language at school. These efforts at assimilation were part of a broader campaign by the Japanese state to civilize the Ainu and eliminate their traditional ways of life. During this period, many Ainu were forced to work as laborers for Japanese settlers, participating in industries such as fishing, timber cutting, and agriculture. The Japanese government enacted policies to systematically strip the Ainu of their land and resources, further eroding their traditional lifestyle. The imposition of Japanese laws also led to the disbandment of Ainu villages and the destruction of their communal structure. The impact of this forced assimilation was profound. By the early 20th century, the Ainu language was in danger of extinction, and their religious practices had been severely diminished. The Ayamant ritual, once the centerpiece of Ainu spiritual life, was banned by the Japanese government, and many of the sacred sites and objects used in rituals were destroyed or abandoned. The Ainu became increasingly marginalized, and their distinct cultural identity was nearly erased from the Japanese consciousness. It wasn't until the latter half of the 20th century that the Ainu began to gain recognition as an indigenous people of Japan. The 1950s and 1960s marked a turning point for the Ainu, as they began to organize and demand recognition from the Japanese government. Activists and scholars began to advocate for the Ainu's rights and the protection of their culture, seeking to revitalize the Ainu language, restore traditional practices, and ensure that future generations would be able to carry on the legacy of their ancestors. In 1997, the Ainu were officially recognized as an indigenous people by the Japanese government. This was a major step forward in acknowledging the Ainu's unique cultural heritage and long history of marginalization. However, the official recognition did not immediately lead to significant changes in the Ainu's socioeconomic conditions. Many Ainu still faced discrimination in Japan, and the Ainu language and cultural practices remained at risk of disappearing entirely. The lack of full legal protections and financial support for cultural revival meant that much of Ainu culture remained under threat. In 2008, the Japanese government passed the Ainu Cultural Promotion Law, which aimed to support the revitalization of Ainu culture, including language and traditional crafts. This law allowed for the establishment of cultural centers, educational programs, and funding for research into Ainu history. It also encouraged the Japanese public to learn about Ainu culture and history, which had previously been largely ignored in national narratives. Since the passage of this law, there has been a renewed interest in Ainu culture and traditions, both within Japan and internationally. The Ainu language has seen some revival efforts, with language classes and courses being offered in universities and cultural centers. Ainu artists and musicians are also gaining recognition for their work, and Ainu festivals are being held throughout Japan to celebrate their cultural heritage. Despite the challenges that remain, the Ainu are slowly rebuilding their community and cultural identity. The Ainu Cultural Foundation, the Upapoi National Ainu Museum and Park, and other initiatives are helping to foster a sense of pride among Ainu people, providing a space for cultural exchange, education, and celebration. The future of the Ainu people remains uncertain, but their resilience and determination to preserve their heritage offer hope for the continued survival and flourishing of Ainu culture. In the face of centuries of adversity, the Ainu people have demonstrated an extraordinary resilience and determination to survive as a distinct cultural group. Despite enduring the trauma of colonization, forced assimilation, and near-total erasure from the national consciousness of Japan, the Ainu have found ways to reconnect with their roots, rediscover their cultural practices, and ensure that their voices are heard in the modern world. The revival of the Ainu spirit, their traditions, language, and ways of life is not just a fight for survival but a defiant statement of cultural pride and identity. In the 21st century, the Ainu have seen a renewed sense of unity as a people determined to revive their heritage. This resurgence has been fueled by the younger generation, who, in contrast to their ancestors who lived in the shadows of Japanese dominance, are determined to reclaim their rightful place in Japan's cultural tapestry. This revival is not only about cultural pride but also about empowerment, a reawakening of the Ainu voice within Japanese society. One of the most significant milestones for the Ainu in the modern era came in 2008, when the Japanese government passed the Ainu Cultural Promotion Law, marking the first official recognition of the Ainu as Japan's indigenous people. This law provided a foundation for the protection and revitalization of Ainu culture, language, and heritage, offering resources for Ainu communities to support their traditional arts, crafts, and languages. While the law was a step forward, it was also clear that it was just the beginning of a much larger journey toward full recognition and empowerment. Many Ainu activists and scholars continue to push for greater legal protections and policies that ensure the cultural survival of their people. In 2019, Japan took another important step by recognizing the Ainu people as an indigenous group in its national constitution, a move that was widely seen as a victory for Ainu rights and cultural recognition. This acknowledgement by the Japanese government was a turning point, allowing for more direct engagement between Ainu representatives and policymakers, leading to further initiatives designed to support cultural preservation and the economic development of Ainu communities. One of the most visible symbols of this revival is the Upapoi National Ainu Museum and Park, which opened in 2020 in the town of Shiraiawai, Hokkaido. This museum, which was built with input from Ainu communities and scholars, serves as a cultural hub and a space for learning and celebration. The Upapoi Museum highlights the history, art, and language of the Ainu, offering a comprehensive view of their cultural practices and traditions. The museum is also a place for Ainu people to gather, share their stories, and preserve their heritage for future generations. The Upapoi National Ainu Museum has become a symbol of the Ainu cultural renaissance, attracting visitors from around Japan and the world, and offering a platform for Ainu voices to be heard on a national stage. The language revitalization efforts are also crucial to the Ainu's ongoing cultural renaissance. For decades, the Ainu language, once nearly extinct, was taught only by a small group of dedicated elders. However, in recent years, efforts to revitalize the language have intensified, with language schools, cultural centers, and universities offering classes in Ainu. Language revitalization programs like those led by the Ainu Language Preservation Society and various local initiatives have provided resources for young Ainu people to learn their ancestral tongue. In some areas, community-driven efforts have led to the creation of new Ainu language literature, songs, and even radio stations. The Ainu language, which was once considered an endangered relic of the past, is now being passed down to younger generations, ensuring that it will survive into the future. In addition to language, the Ainu's traditional arts and crafts are being revived and celebrated. Atu's weaving, the intricate art of creating traditional Ainu garments from plant fibers, has become a symbol of Ainu craftsmanship. Many Ainu women are working to pass this ancient craft down to their daughters, ensuring that the knowledge and techniques of Atu's weaving are not lost. Similarly, Ainu carving and embroidery are being preserved as important expressions of Ainu culture, with contemporary Ainu artists adapting traditional techniques to produce modern works that reflect their identity. The Ainu's spiritual practices are also seeing a resurgence. Though the Japanese government had sought to suppress the Ainu religion for much of the 20th century, today there is a renewed interest in the Ainu's relationship to the Kamui, the spirits that inhabit all aspects of nature. Ainu ceremonies, such as the Iamant Bear ritual, which had been forbidden for generations, are being performed once again in a more limited and respectful way. These rituals, which center around the spiritual act of sending the spirit of the bear to the gods, are performed with the utmost respect and reverence for the animal and the natural world. Other ceremonies, such as the Koten Rami, continue to be held as expressions of gratitude to the spirits that sustain the Ainu people. Beyond cultural practices, the Ainu are also seeking to assert their political rights and gain greater representation in Japanese society. Over the years, many Ainu organizations have worked to raise awareness about the challenges faced by their communities, advocating for land rights, education, and economic development. The Ainu still face challenges in terms of social and economic integration, with many members of the community living in rural poverty or facing discrimination in urban areas. However, the increased recognition of their cultural and political rights offers hope for a more inclusive future. Activists are pushing for the Ainu to have a greater role in policymaking, especially in areas such as land management and cultural preservation, where their traditional knowledge can contribute to the greater good of Japanese society. While the journey toward full recognition and equality is ongoing, there are signs that the Ainu people are beginning to reshape their identity within Japan. The contemporary Ainu youth are increasingly proud of their heritage, and many are taking an active role in reclaiming and redefining what it means to be Ainu in the modern world. They are not just preserving the past, but also adapting it to the present, creating new cultural expressions that blend traditional Ainu elements with contemporary forms of art, music, and media. The Ainu are no longer a silent, forgotten people but a vibrant, resilient community that is determined to ensure their culture is recognized and celebrated. The Ainu culture today stands at a crossroads. While challenges remain, the Ainu people have made significant strides in their ongoing struggle for recognition and cultural revival. The path they walk is one of perseverance and hope, as they continue to reclaim their identity, protect their traditions, and pass on their cultural heritage to future generations. The story of the Ainu is not one of defeat but one of resilience, of a people who have faced centuries of hardship and have emerged with their cultural spirit stronger than ever. As Japan's indigenous people, the Ainu continue to prove that despite the weight of history, their identity, culture, and spirit remain unbroken. The legacy of the Ainu is one of resistance, renewal, and revival, a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the power of cultural pride. As Japan moves forward into a new era, the Ainu will continue to assert their rightful place in the country's history and future, ensuring that their story is not forgotten, but celebrated for generations to come.